So now my haere mai, and welcome to the Writer-Producer Masterclass. And this has been brought to you by the New Zealand Writers Guild and also the Screen Production and Development Association. My name is Kathryn Burnett. I apologise for the dark lighting. There's not much I can do about it. I am a screenwriter that has been working in the industry for over 20 years, and I've worked across film and TV and also a little bit of theatre. I've worked with lots and lots of producers, so I'm really intrigued to see how this masterclass goes. This is the first module of Collaboration in Action, which is brought to you, as I've mentioned, by SPADA and the New Zealand Writers Guild. And today's discussion is about the writer-producer relationship, which I am intrigued to hear more about. So Karin Williams and I will be asking our amazing panel all sorts of questions about this. And I just want to point out to you that there's an opportunity for you to ask questions of people on the panel and of us, but we're going to keep the Q&A towards the end of the session, but please feel free to jump into chat and let us know what you are thinking. So over to you, Karin.
Whoopsie, sorry about that. Kia ora na koutou katoa, off to a great start, muted. I'm Karin. Welcome, no mai haere mai, to everybody, to all the panelists and all the participants. We can see you scrolling up at the side of the screen here. I'm a producer, and I will say that I love writers very much, because without writers, we don't really have stories. Those are the ones that do all the hard work. It's my pleasure to welcome to the panel Nick Ward and Michelle Turner, and Kathryn Fitzgerald and Tusi Tamasese. Both of these teams have many years of experience, decades in fact, of working together with very productive collaborative relationships, which actually may be a lot harder than it sounds. So today we're going to hear from them, their experience about working together, and some tips, thoughts, ideas and advice for all of you out there. So I'm going to let Kathryn kick off with the first questions, and we'll let the panelists tell you something about themselves.
So welcome, panel. What I would really like to know from you both sets of writer-producer teams. Thank you so much, Karin. What do you think makes your team work so well? Welcome, panel.
Shall we start? Well, I would have to say, I think it's a shared common language, really. The one thing I would say, which kind of cemented things for me working with Michelle, is Michelle and I both did a short film pod a while ago. We're the premiere short film, and we did a thing where we got everybody to send in their entries and send us 2 scripts. And then we cut the scripts in half, and Michelle read. So we both, not half, but we both read the scripts, but we didn't talk to each other while we were doing that. We made a strict rule: let's not talk to each other while we're reading these scripts. And then we did get together during it, but the thing was, let's not. But then when we finally got together at the end and looked at all the scripts together, we had a yes, no, and maybe pile, and they were pretty much exactly the same. And for me, I think that's a really good example that we were, and that's why we work so well. We're on the same page. We have the same likes and dislikes. Yes, sometimes Michelle likes things I don't like, and sometimes I like things she doesn't like. Michelle's not big on the gory horror films, but then again, neither am I. But we have a shared common language, common interests. We just know what we like. Is that fair, Michelle?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. And also, I think we have similar values, as well as liking the same sorts of projects, which I think is good. Although you can vary a bit, is that we have the same sort of things that we like that work. We work well together as 2 individual personalities, and I think that's very important. I think collaborating with people you share creative and just personally get along with is a huge help, and that really makes it, particularly for the down times and also the good times, it's really nice to have a connection.
Fantastic. So was Stickman the first thing you worked on?
I'd like to add to that just one thing that occurred to me while you were saying it, Michelle. Sure. Michelle and I recently had a meeting with a big overseas company, big overseas streamer network kind of thing. And it was really great to sit in that meeting, because if I didn't know the answer to a question about our project, Michelle knew the answer and vice versa, which again shows that we really complement each other very well.
Oh, fantastic. So was Stickman the first thing you worked on together? Did you know each other before that?
No, Hamish Rothwell was the director, and he had sent me the script. I was living in London, and Hamish and I had known each other, although we hadn't actually worked together before. And I really loved it and came back to New Zealand. And then I was saying the other day, I think I met Nick at drinks. So that's very appropriate.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was really nervous and really wanted to impress Michelle. And yeah, I drank a bit too much, and I think I was a bit of a dick. But I really wanted her to like me. This producer's coming from overseas, and it's really important. And luckily, in spite of that, she does like me.
Oh, very good. And so despite all of that, a great friendship and working relationship was born, obviously. So I'd like to shift over to Kathryn and Tusi. Same question. So what makes your team work so well together? It's some extraordinary films under your belt. So go Kathryn, let's hear from you. You may need to unmute yourself.
I was going to say we should start with Tusi. I would say for me, good collaboration, and it's utterly true for us, is about trust and respect. And you need shared values, but also complementary skills, knowledge, and perspectives. So you both, we both, I think, love similar films, have a shared vision. We've been lucky enough to work pretty much from early on every project. So we share and understand what the project is about. That's my job, is to really understand what Tusi's trying to achieve. But it's also, I feel respected, which is a nice thing, and trusted, and I trust and respect Tusi in great measure.
Awesome, thank you very much. Tusi, what is your take on this question?
Can't trust.
Unmute yourself first. I have to remind everybody constantly.
It's everything Kathryn was saying. Plus, from my side is also the environment a producer can create for people to work in. Mm-hmm. I think that's very important. The people that Kathryn sort of brings in, mm-hmm. and surround you. It's very good to have someone who knows that side of production, the financing, the producing, but also someone who can creatively, bounce ideas off. And I think it's a good balance of
Sure.
Working.
Thank you. So what do you think, Tusi, is the ideal environment to be created for someone like you that is a writer and director? Like, what is the ideal environment that Kathryn has created for you? And do you think generally is great?
So it's I was very fortunate that the people that Kathryn sort of brought in, the people like Leon, Nathaniel mm-hmm. Lees, I got access to those people. Mm-hmm. But also on set, you don't really feel the productions, the producer side of the things, because Kathryn's got that covered, and all you're focusing on is making the film, is yes. the creative stuff, mm-hmm. and that's fantastic. That's something I tend to go back to Kathryn for, because she paves the road, so I can just concentrate on focusing on the vision and creating the project, and you never feel anything from any forces, any producing stuff enter your zone, because Kathryn's got that covered. But also it's all if you get stuck, you need people to talk to. You have Leon, but you also have Kathryn, who's always been there from the beginning of the project. So that sort of environment, people can flourish.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds pretty dreamy to me. Fantastic, thank you so much. Karin, take over for the next question if you'd like to.
Guys, I'm interested in digging into the development process a little bit and finding out how you actually work together. So The question would be, who comes up with the idea for the project? Do you do that together, or does one or the other come up with the idea? And then as you develop, are you working together throughout that process, or is it more about the writer writes the script and then the producer has a look at it? Let's ask Nick how that works for you guys.
Well, for us, it's I can think of two different examples of how that would work, and of recent projects that we've been working on. One was Michelle had been overseas at what was it, 37 South, was it? Is that what it was? And while she was there, a lot of people asked her about, have you got a project like this? And we didn't have a project like that. Have you got a project that's aimed at this particular audience? So Michelle came back and said to me, have you got something like that? And I had to go, no, but I guess I can. And then together, I took it away, came up with an idea, pitched it back to Michelle. She said, that works. So then we took that back and we pitched that to the marketplace, and it got a lot of traction. And so that was one way that it worked. Michelle found that there was a hole in the market, that people were looking for something, and it was a hole that we could fill. And then on the opposite side of things, I had written a project set in Asia, like not set in New Zealand at all, just and completely not in English, because I thought that would be interesting, a bit of a challenge. And Michelle found something like it's difficult to talk around because there's a lot of secrecy around these projects. But we found a way for us to get flown over there and talk to the various people once we'd shown them the project, and there was a lot of love for the project. So there's one where Michelle found a hole in the market and came to me and we filled it. The other one was I came up with a crazy idea of doing something that was well out of my comfort zone, and Michelle found a place for that to be. Is that fair enough, Michelle?
No, that would be right. Yeah, particularly the Asian one. There had been a competition, or competition might be the wrong word, but we applied. It was the Seoul Film Commission was flying a team over, and for a project that happened to be set in Asia, and we had one. So we applied and were successful. And then on the way, we met another company, and so it was just grabbing that little moment that might happen, and it did. I mean, obviously, you apply to lots of stuff and aren't successful, but this happened to be one that was successful, and it was really great. And yeah, the 37 South, I talked to a distributor, and Marigold Hotel had just come out and been hugely successful, and they were like, we want films for an older audience. And so I went back to Nick and we had a project. Yeah, so it does vary. Yeah.
So it sounds like in your case, you've got an ability to be responsive to the marketplace. If distributors or, people are telling you that's what they're after. Does it work the same way for you, Kathryn and Tusi, or is it more about Tusi goes in a dark room and comes up with some amazing auteur idea? How does that work for you, Tusi? And you're, unmute.
I think the first project, we discussed, I think the orator, we sort of discussed what I was fresh into the industry and I didn't know much. I've written some ideas, but I think through Kathryn, we all discussed what is personal, how a producer sort of cultivates a young, inexperienced mind, and so along the way, I sort of went out and started developing the script, and then I gave it back to Kathryn, and then from there, that's the art. But I've also got other projects that I've just developed myself, and I'm waiting for the right moment to, give it to Kathryn and all that stuff.
So Kathryn, at what point do you get involved in the process of development?
Well, as Tusi says, it can either be talking about ideas, listening to ideas. I'm happy to look at things that are very much a work in progress. And I mean, there's no template for development. you know, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, I guess. Well, I guess everyone is doing it, but it's not that easy. I think the best thing I heard recently was somebody saying, you know how everyone says it's not rocket science, making a film. Actually, it is. It's really hard, and so many moving parts have to be designed perfectly and fit together, and it's constantly moving. So it actually is a really complex process, and there is no one way of doing it, and every project is different as well. But I guess that once you've made one film together, it's much easier to make the next film together, I have to say. You know each other better. You don't have to, where you both gain respect, but you're also open with each other. You can be frank. You don't have to think about how do I work with this person, because you've done it. But it's like any relationship, you're endlessly figuring it out, and you know you have to keep on building that respect and understanding of what each other's trying to do and what each other can do, and equally you know, building trust is something you maintain. You don't just buy it. And making a film is not transactional. It's not like I can't say, you know, here's X dollars and you give me, you know, Y widgets. It doesn't work like that. It's a creative process, and understanding that creative process takes time, moves at different speeds, and needs everything to sort of fit together. I mean, once you've got a film kind of financed into production, it's a train that's left the station, and you just have to catch it and keep making it work. But in the development process, you're building something, and you need to keep up momentum, but you also need to be respectful of the time it takes and the resources you need. So every development process, you bring in different things. There's no single answer. You have a huge toolbox of things you could maybe bring to the party, but you don't use them all in every project. And they're not just script consultancy ones. I think we got an actor to read the script on one project to say how he saw the one character, to do a sort of breakdown the way an actor would read a script. There are all sorts of things we'll bring along. Some of our best development sessions on the Orator, I think, were driving around Samoa, where we just talked and talked and talked in the car as we drove and looked at, we were really looking at locations, but what we were really doing was exploring the project.
I think what you say about relationships is really important, because sometimes we hear stories about people who have rung up producers the day before an application is due in for funding and said, could I put your name on this application? Which is a bit rude. Anybody who's listening, please don't do that. And also we hear, well, just give us the money and let us do our thing, which is, if you said that to someone in a relationship, just give me the money and I'll do whatever I want with it, I don't know how well that would go. So yeah, it is a relationship, and in both of your cases, it's taken a while to build that trust and collaboration. So over to you, Kathryn. I think she's got another question.
Oh, thank you, Karin. I actually have a couple which will surprise absolutely nobody. But before I kick off, I'd just like to remind everybody watching that you're able to ask questions of anyone on the panel or facilitators by just jumping into chat and popping your thoughts in there. Absolutely welcome. And we will absolutely get to those at the end of the session in our Q&A. But I'm interested because there's been a lot of discussion from both teams about respect, which sounds really great. And I'm going, yay, respect, we love that. I'm wondering if, I've got a couple of questions, but my first is, Do you consciously cultivate that? I know it sounds like a really odd thing, or do you just go, oh, well, it's just going to organically emerge? Do you just rely on it organically emerging, or do you actually cultivate that respect? And I'm going to start with Michelle and Nick for that question. Is there anything that you do to enhance that?
No, I mean, I like to think whoever I work with on any film set, that respect is there, because there are people who have done this for a long time and know their job very, very well. So hopefully for me, it's a natural thing to do. But yes, it does take time. And the trust thing is particularly important, because that, again, takes time. So I'm not sure I deliberately do it, whether it's just instinctive.
Well, it certainly makes things easier. Like, it's a sensible thing to do, isn't it? Right. So Nick, what do you think to that?
Well, yeah, I think so. I respect Michelle above all else. And I'm not going to name any names in this story, but someone very high up took me aside for a beer and said, I think that this project will happen if Michelle is not on it. And I went, get fucked, is what I said. And probably limited some things there. But the last thing I wanted to do was go ahead without Michelle, because it was our project. It wasn't just me. Yes, I'd written the script. Any project that Michelle and I do, and I'm working on the script, she'll read the script and she'll give me feedback on it. Like, not a lot of feedback, but whenever she said, Michelle, whenever you say something, it's always, I'm an idiot if I don't listen to it, you know? And so I'm sorry for the swearing, everybody, but and thankfully that person is no longer in any position of power, and Michelle and I are you know, making some really great projects together. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said in this industry. It's your eye can get caught and you can get turned very quickly, because someone will say, I'll give you all the money to make this. And really, yeah, and you will hear it a lot. One of the things is, oh yeah, that person is a complete a-hole, but hey, they get shit done. And the two operative words in that scenario are a-hole and shit done, because yeah, they will get it done, but it will be shit. And if you're just going to that person because, you know, they've got the checkbook, then I think you'll experience some problems along the way. You want to be in a relationship where you respect that person and you respect their opinion and they respect your opinion. And I think that's true of both the teams here, you know, that's it. Yeah, and you know, we found ourselves sitting on projects for a while we find the right partners to partner with. And I think you'd have to say it, Michelle, the people that we're working with the other partners that we're working with on the projects are like us, you know, we wouldn't step into something if we felt we weren't respected. And I don't know quite how it's worked, but we've actually got a lot of, I mean, as I say, sitting in a room with Michelle in an Asian boardroom, and I can see how much they freaking love you over there, Michelle. You know, they go, oh yes, and Michelle's those, and I go, well, I'm in the right room because these people respect her as much as I do.
And they also love you, because of course we're a good team like that. Is that Nick? Yeah. But again, it is you've got to respect people. It is such a hard industry. If you don't respect and like the people you work with, then you just don't bother.
Yeah, I fully agree. So, Kathryn, what about you? Do you think it is something that you work towards with your collaborators, or is it something that just emerges organically in the same way that Michelle has described? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thinking. Well, I mean, it's funny to say actively, it is organic respect, but it's also quite explicit. So that, you know, as long as when you first meet somebody to work with them, you need to be fairly explicit about your values and the basis on which you want to work together. So it's about being transparent as well.
Yeah, I think that's really a great point. It's a really great point.
So, you know, there are times, as Tusi said, talked about clearing the way so he can focus on directing. I don't hide anything from Tusi. It's not like I keep things from him, but he can trust me that if something doesn't need to concern him, then he doesn't get bothered with it. Now that takes quite a lot. That's a lot of mutual trust and respect. So I guess you build it actively. I wouldn't say it is organic, but it is active. And you also can say one thing, and if you don't walk your talk, then there's no point saying it.
Thank you. And Tusi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's all good.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So that all sounds really lovely and super chummy and warm. You know what I'm going to say. So what happens and how do you deal with, and I'm looking at Nick and Michelle again, how do you deal with disagreements? How do you troubleshoot problems? And there can be disagreements of all sorts. What do you do when you don't agree?
When have we disagreed on something, Michelle?
I know it sounds really corny, but we don't really have massive disagreements. I don't want to sound like it's all Hallmark cards, but it sort of isn't. I mean, one thing I would like to say, and this is probably more a production head, but when we first did Stickmen, and obviously it was a small budget and we were struggling, and I went to Nick and I said, we're struggling on these scenes or with it. And he rewrote stuff that still made the film good, but solved the problems. And that was just so fantastic as a producer to have a writer who can do that. And I'm not saying the story has to go, because that is, after all, the key thing. But it was such a help. And I really learned then how valuable that collaboration is. Great it was to have a writer who could sort of think how to solve stuff. And hugely valuable.
Well, and I will say on the other side of that coin, it was the first film I'd ever worked on, the first film script I'd ever written. But Michelle came to me and explained really well how the scene was going to blow the budget, and basically, and then it became actually the rewrite became a standout scene in the film. And so, that was one of the things about it. Sometimes Michelle and I disagree on wine choice. No, we don't actually. We both like a Chardonnay. But I will say one thing about, just listening to someone. There was one thing that I did disagree with Michelle on, and I didn't say anything at the time, and I just went along with it. We were in Seoul in Korea, which is a very busy town, and we had to rush off to go and do a meeting with the Seoul Film Commission. And I was like, well, we should get an Uber there, or we should get a taxi to take us there. And Michelle said, no, we're going to catch the train. We're going to go on the train, and everything is in Korean. Like, thankfully, the lines are numbered. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to be doing that. and yet away we went, and it was absolutely fantastic because we really got to experience the culture at the ground level straight away. We'd been there 2 days, and we were riding this incredibly complicated network of trains. And when we got off the other end, they said, so did your driver find the place all right? And Michelle said proudly, no, we caught the train here. And they went, you did what? How long have you been here? And that's the only time I've ever disagreed with Michelle, but I didn't tell her. But I was wrong.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to shift the question slightly for Kathryn and Tusi. So what do you think is the wrong way to resolve disagreements, whether they be creative or otherwise? And this is not specifically to do with your relationship, but just generally, like I'm really aware there'll be lots of newer producers and writers listening to this. And so what is the wrong way to go about doing this? We'll start with you, Kathryn.
You don't know what the wrong way is until you've done it, really. I guess, well, I was kind of thinking, well, if you do them, if there is a misstep, apologizing is not a bad idea. And not an I'm sorry, but just plain I'm sorry. But I guess what I would, I mean, in a way, you're solving problems on a film all the time. And you're usually having to bring people in to solve the problems. I would say the hardest part of making a film is the edit, because you think you're there and you need to keep pushing to something better than what you've just achieved. And that's really hard, because it involves people you're working with thinking a film can be better and better, and you're also having to accept what you've actually got, I guess. So I guess the edit process is where you're most likely to be, I think, most likely to find problems, and it's part of the process. I also think, I've said this to everybody I've ever worked with, there is a point at every stage of production, development, pre-production, production, post-production, and release, where you truly believe that you've probably just made the worst mistake of your life, and you're going to have to face the music, and everyone will know that you are completely talentless and you'll never make another film. And pretty much everybody who's creatively involved in the process goes through that, and it's real. You really believe it, and you really believe you're finally going to be exposed as a complete fraud. And getting through that is probably the hardest thing, and getting through that with the people who are going through that crisis. I mean, does everyone agree you have that crisis? And I think that's probably the point where honesty, openness, humility, and finding some sort of inner strength is what gets both you individually and the partnership through.
Great, thank you. It's a really good insight. Tusi, did you have thoughts on, you think, what might be the wrong way to resolve any difficulties or problems that you might have in a partnership?
I don't know. I've never come across any problems that we sort of had to that we couldn't solve. I think that was all. It's more just discussing. I think just problems are, people have ideas about the project, and I think it's very important that you listen, as from a director's point of view, writer's point of view, is just listening to what they're saying, and at the end of the day, it's the focus is on the film and whatever's right for the film and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I can't really say. I think Kathryn, if there's any problem, it's inside the editing suite.
Right.
I think yes, creating the film and finding the inspiration to carry on after you see your first cut.
Right. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Thank you. Karin, I know you're probably desperate to jump in with a new question to get us off that topic.
Yeah, not desperate. I'm just sort of thinking about the last couple of weeks with facing a few of those moments of doom when you think the whole thing is about to just go off the rails and down in flames. So yeah, let's talk about what I'd like to do now is sort of shift the focus a little bit to our audience. We know we've got quite a few new producers and writers out there, and people will often ask, well, how do I find a producer? But once I do find a producer, or if I find some producers, what would you advise people to look for in a collaborator? And we've got a question from someone in the audience who said, as a writer, how do you gauge a creative fit with a producer early on? So let's talk to Tusi again. When you say if you were a new young producer, what would you advise people to be thinking about when they're looking to form a relationship or a collaboration with a producer?
I think it's for me, it's a project. Like you have to share the same idea. If you look at normally when I give my scripts to Kathryn very early stages, it's more of it's like a test to see if Kathryn picks the ideas that are in there, and amongst the mess that I've written. And normally that's what she does. She picks it, and that's the first thing that that gets the ball rolling, is that you see the same idea, and it could be turn into a potential film, interesting film. And then from there, it's also the networking, who the kind of people that are around the producer, the kind of people that the producer works with. Like through Kathryn, I got to work with Leon, and other great filmmakers. So it's the type of films as well that producers want to make. Like, you can't go to a producer and say, I want to make a horror, and the producer sees doesn't like making horrors. It's having that the starting point is just you sort of share the same ideas. Sort of see the same potential in an idea. And then what else? And many other things, you sort of find along the way, how a producer works with other people, most of the time is like from my point of view, I don't really see the sacrifice and the stuff that producers make for the project, and that's something that I'm thankful for Kathryn, because she's done quite a lot. She's a small woman, but she makes stuff rolling, makes the film go. So I guess it's just, you have to work with the person to find out, and then to see if that collaboration works. Unfortunately for me, it worked.
Great point, Tusi, there about the sort of the ecosystem, if you will, and the connections of the producer. In your case, you're talking about Leon Nabi, the great cinematographer, and a lot of most first-time filmmakers don't get to work with a cinematographer of that stature. But in your case, you had a producer that had, I guess, an existing relationship. Is that right, Kathryn? Did you already have a working relationship with Leon?
Yes. I hadn't made it. It was my first feature as well. I guess it's knowing who. Well, I mean, I've got lots of respect for. I mean, I love Leon, if he's listening. But there are other DOPs whose work I love. So it's about finding relationships and finding the right relationships. I think at one stage, when Tusi was asked about making The Orator, he said we chose people who could endure, and and yes, we did. We thought very carefully about who would be the right people to take to Samoa, and I hope it was more fun than enduring, but there was a bit of endurance involved, as there is with any feature film. I've experienced it in lots of ways. I've been interviewed by people. I've been rejected several times by people who thought they'd go for someone more famous or more powerful, or who was better at getting the money, when I thought we were working together. But that's just how it rolls. And I guess you just have to be very philosophical and know that people choose what's right for them as well. So, you can only be yourself, and it's important to, it's pretty insulting when you get an email from somebody who has no idea what work you've done, and the address line actually doesn't even use your right name, which happens more often than you would believe. So you realise that the person is writing to every producer on the Film Commission's list, and you go, well, that's a kind of scattergun approach. It's a really hard job. It's going into business with somebody. Making a film together is going into business with somebody. So you need to completely share the purpose, the kaupapa, and put that in front all the time. It's not about your own ego on any side. If the ego gets in the road, then you're not making a film. So that's where the energy has to go. But you have to think about it. Same with finding the right distributor, finding the right sales agent, finding the right investors. You can't just think, oh, I'll take their money at whatever cost. So I guess it's about building those relationships and taking the care and the energy to build those relationships.
Great. Yes, thank you. It is a business of relationships, no doubt about that. They're critical. Nick, what advice would you have for our newer writers on connecting with a producer?
Well, I got to say, I agree with everything that's just been said. So there's been a lot of stuff covered off there. One thing that I would say is one thing I absolutely do not look for in a producer, and I see it coming up more and more often, is producers that want to write and rewrite and write and rewrite, or maybe change a scene or two and then take a writer's credit on it. Really, those people should be dragged out in the street and set on fire because, there's a thing. As a writer, I want to be doing my job, and the producer's job is to make my job, two things, easier and better. And just in a story we told before about Michelle coming to me and saying, we can't shoot these scenes, I need you to change them. She explained to me why the scenes needed to change, and it was because of the budget and because of what she gave me options of what we could do. And then I worked within that as my parameters. She didn't come to me with a rewritten scene and say, just put this in. And look, I know that makes me sound like a grumpy old bugger, but when you as a writer, you want to be able to, yes, I'm not so big-headed. I think I haven't got anything to learn, and nobody at any stage should feel that they've got nothing to learn. As a writer, I learn new stuff all the time, but there seems to be a lot of producers out there who are itching to do my job, and sure, go off and write the script yourself. Don't come and try and tell me I'm a team member. You don't, if you're on set, you don't walk around and tell the DOP where to put the lights. You don't tell them where to put, you listen to them, and they're a team member, all right? You can instruct the writer where to put more darkness or light in the scene. You can instruct them without dictating to them what to do. And if you find if I'm as a writer, that's something I would look for straight away. I want to look for someone that's going to support you and guide you, not someone who's going to take the laptop off you and start writing the script for you, Grumpy old man.
Go for it, Nick. Be as grumpy as you want. Because that does come down to a question of respect, which is a word that I've heard you all use a lot. And that is a hallmark of disrespect, is to, grab the laptop and start writing. Kathryn, with your hand up.
I was just going to add that as a producer and as a director, if it's not a writer-director, you have creative input, but the person who gets the credit is the person who puts the words on the page. And I'm very adamant about that you don't get a writing credit just because you worked on the development. I work in the development process all the time. I would never dream of taking a writing credit, but I know that Tusi and other people I work with listen to my thoughts, but I try not to give advice. My philosophy is, when you're working in development, if I think I know what the problem is, then if I figure out the question to which that is the answer, then the worst that somebody can come up with is my answer. But I have to say, mostly they come up with a much, much better answer. And it's a process. So, and I'm totally with you, Nick. If somebody's trying to do somebody else's job on a film, then they're not doing their own job, which is the one they're getting paid for. So, it's great if a producer thinks they can write, but actually they should be producing. When they're writing, they're not producing. When you're directing, you're not producing, vice versa.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that point that you just made. I worked on a project a while ago where I was a script consultant on it, and I was sitting in the meetings where people were pitching ideas, and then the script came back, and I saw I saw the writer's name who was doing all the work, I saw the producer's name, and I saw the director's name, and they'd also put my name there too. And I went, just because we're in the room doesn't give us the right to have our names on there. And I went back in and fought and said, you take your names off there. This person's writing this film. It's their idea. It's their story. How dare you? But yeah, I think that's something important you should look for. Someone who is going to support, as a writer, someone who's going to support you and make your work better.
Kathryn, you were waving a hand.
I was waving my hand because I was, of course, what Nick said really resonated for me as well. And I was thinking that really, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were talking about people that basically are editing often. They're not writing and creating from nothing. They are tinkering with something that already exists. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, tinkering, but also making a suggestion, which is like, no, sorry, you don't get a writer's credit for suggesting that the scene is inside rather than outside.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, I personally haven't come across that a lot, but I know other people who have, and it's outrageous, really. Like, you go, okay, I always like to say, if someone talks to me about, I think I deserve a writing credit, I go, I would like to see your draft of the script, and then we'll discuss it.
Oh.
And if they don't have that, then why are they asking for a writing credit? That's my thought. Anyway, enough from me.
But I would also say, on a slightly more positive note, when you're looking for someone as a writer, if you're looking for a producer to work with, when I was listening to what Kathryn was saying, don't fire out an email out to everybody and sundry. Suss them out, find out. I mean, we live in a world where people go on a date with someone and they Google them first to find out about them. You'll Google a date, but you won't Google a producer. Find out about them, find out what they're into, find out what they like, find out what they love, find out if you've got a shared interest, because if the two of you play freaking badminton, then that might be a start of a great relationship.
I think that's a scene in a movie, isn't it? I think I just recently, or a TV series where the guy plays badminton. Michelle, did you have thoughts about what you're looking for, advice on finding the right producer, or as a writer, or as a producer finding a writer?
I think that it's got to be, again, I have writers approach me and I say, let's have a coffee or even a wine. And I honestly think your gut instinct is very much like, I couldn't work with this person, or I can't work with this person. And obviously the project is, part of that. But instinctively, you've got to think, I mean, it is a relationship. It's like a marriage. It's you've got to work with them closely. And I think if you can trust that first meeting, at least to explore further, that is actually quite important. I go a lot on my instinct, and I find it's generally held me in good stead.
Kathryn, shall I pass to you?
Great. Hello, back again. So off the back of that, this segues beautifully in. So we've talked about other people trying to do each other's jobs, which is a no-no. And I was wondering, what are the other not negotiable negative behaviors that you guys, and this is everybody, thinks, if this is happening, this is not great, and probably this relationship isn't going to work. So what are the not negotiables? And I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about small skirmishes or disagreements. I'm talking about the stuff that you go, this is happening, this is a no. So Michelle, I'm going to start with you just for a change.
Yeah, I think it came down to respect. There was a writer, and there was just, I was treated like a sort of, not an assistant, but it was like, oh, well, you can do this. And in fact, the director's better at this, and they should do that. And it was just like, you know what, this isn't going to work. And instantly it was like, again, it actually came down to respect. And I think it wasn't just me. I think it was the role of the producer. And I think those two things were just enough for me to go, life's too short. I've got other people I'd rather work with. And we can't quite remember. Nick, you were involved in that. We just walked away, I think.
Well, I think this is the thing to remember too, is if you're coming into an existing relationship and this particular person that Michelle's talking about tried to play me off against her, which was kind of a bad move, really, because if I'm picking a side, I think I've made my position clear on this already. I'm picking Michelle's side. I'm going where the sun shines brightly. This is and trying to play me off like. And of course, both of us are not involved with that person anymore. And that's basically what happens. And again, it's this kind of respect thing. Don't think you're going to come in and turn our heads against each other,
And so, Nick, are there any, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's really hard to do it. You should do it soon. Before you get too far down the track and too much development has happened and possibly money has changed hands. Sometimes it's hard, but it's just like kind of cut it off.
And so, Nick, what are the behaviours from your perspective, apart from the rewriting and grabbing of laptops? What are the behaviours that are absolutely not negotiable for you? That's it.
Well, look, I don't like bullies. I mean, but that goes without saying. Bullies and racists and sexists. None of us want to work with those kind of people, and that's all a given nowadays. But bullies are eternal for me every time. I'm sure everyone on the panel is going to disagree with me, but no one likes a bully, no one likes a bully. Also, I think for me, the one thing that will always, rather than making it a negative thing, one thing, the thing that will turn me off, the thing that will always attract me to someone is a passion, and it doesn't matter if the project isn't quite there. If they've got a passion for the project and they've got a passion for what they're doing, then suddenly you go, I'm really attracted to this person. And so, but if that passion is in the wrong place, if I want to make movies because I want to make money, you're in the wrong business, but that's the thing. You've got to respect a passion. And if there isn't a passion there, if the passion is for the wrong thing, then perhaps that's not somewhere you want to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. And Tusi, what about you? What's a absolute not negotiable in terms of behaviour for you?
I think everything Nick was saying, bullying, and especially passion. Yeah, that's quite an important thing. If you can see that the person doesn't have that in the project, then it's. Yeah, but I can't really talk because I've been very lucky.
Great, thank you. So, Kathryn, what about you? So, what are absolute not negotiable crappy behaviours from writers and also other producers you've worked with? Like, what's the line for you?
I've been pretty lucky. Maybe I choose people well. Oops. Let's turn that off. I mean, mostly bad incidences of bad behavior, in my opinion, are usually based in some kind of fear. So, that's just the little stuff. That's not non-negotiable. But I guess it's like any relationship. Honesty, courage, other things that you expect of people. And so cowardice, lying. I don't know. I don't really see it in that negative framework. There's Nick.
Nick, you have to unmute yourself if you're going to jump in.
I will. Oh, sorry. I was just something that Kathryn said there just sparked me, which is, in terms of it's a really simple thing, but being on time for a meeting or responding to an email, not just leaving it forever. Man, I tell you what, if you do that, you instantly, everyone will love you if you're on time or if you respond to stuff and you hit deadlines. I mean, I'm surprised that I've encountered it a lot recently in this industry, is people just let deadlines fly on by. And thankfully, I mean, one thing I do is I always make sure that I might be a substandard writer and an obnoxious human being to be around, but I hit a deadline. So everybody wants to work with the person that hits the deadline.
Thank you very much for that. Michelle, jump on in.
I also want to say, because again, it doesn't want to sound negative, one of the things I love about working with Nick is you have a laugh. And honestly, you've got to have a laugh. You really got to enjoy the person you work with. And it's funny, I worked on a show recently and the makeup artist said to me, I've never laughed so much as on this show. And I just think laughter is not to be undervalued. And, you know, it is hard and it is tough, but if you can kind of get joy and laugh, it really helps.
Nice point.
I mean, I have to agree with that. It's really important to have a bit of a laugh along the way. I mean, the funnier things are, I mean, just a little bit of humor in your day really helps you out. A bit of unexpected humor, tripping in and coming and making it. I mean, that's a good laugh will save the day in many ways. And if you're not laughing, then you're doing something else, you know?
Okay. Thank you for that, Nick. Brilliant. Karin, over to you.
Well, I thought he was going to use his cat filter. That was much better. So I wanted to talk about the relationship with other partners in the production, particularly funders, networks, platforms, distributors, all of those other people that you have to make a film because they're giving you the money or the television series. And specifically about how you handle notes and feedback. Having been a person who had to write notes and feedback, some of which I'm sure wasn't appreciated, I'm interested to hear how you guys tackle that. As producers, do you hide the horrible notes from your writers, or do you just, let them have at it? What's the process that you use for dealing with that kind of feedback, which you are going to get, and it's not always going to be super sensitive? Should we start with Michelle?
I'm always super honest with Nick because I don't see much of a point to not be. And I also try and keep a really open mind. And in my experience, generally in notes, there's some good stuff and generally there's some bad stuff. And you just have to sort of navigate that. And I mean, what I love about working with Nick is he's always open to feedback. He might not like it, he might not even agree with it, and we may not agree with it. But I think take it on board. I mean, partly because they're the ones with the money, but also sometimes, it might be a good idea or not. And if you're going to sort of go back with responses to that, I think have reasons why certain ideas don't work or why some might. But I don't think hiding stuff, it's not how I work anyway.
I would say really interesting is Michelle and I had an experience recently, and the big overseas investor type people, they had some notes, they wanted to change the script, and Michelle fundamentally disagreed with it, and we told them that, and I thought, no, I said to Michelle, I can make it work. I think I can make this change work. We did it and sent it through to them, and then they came back to us and said, no, you were right, it's terrible. It doesn't work at all. So sometimes people come to their senses.
But did you do the change badly on purpose, Nick?
How dare you? No, I did it to the best of my advantage, but it was never going to work, was it, Michelle?
No, it was the opening and it just didn't feel right. No. And to their credit, they agreed.
Yeah. And I think that's something I'd like to see from from people that are giving feedback here, is to admit when they are wrong, because I can't remember that happening very often.
But as you say, you gave it a go and you gave it a good old college try, and whatever that actually is.
Yes, I gave it a go. I ruined the script for them.
And it didn't work. So there you go. That was one creative approach. Tusi, how do you handle notes? Does Kathryn let you see them, or does she just keep it a secret from you?
Yeah, I don't mind. I any feedback is good feedback, I think. But it all depends on like what Michelle was saying. It's how you explain it, like and how you sort of resolve it. It's maybe it's just I guess you're missing something, or they're missing something. Then it's you just dig into your script and see how you can resolve it. But it comes down to reason. You have to have a good reason that stays there. If you explain it to them clearly that this is why you want to do it. I've had some situations like that, where people came in and had a look at the cut of the film, and they suggested some parts needed changing, and you just had to explain it to them that a script is the way you build your script. Everything ties. If you change this, it's going to affect this thing, and they understood, and then that's it. But any feedback is good feedback. It's just take it and then move on.
I just have to say that I agree wholeheartedly. And one thing, if you're going to be a writer in this business, get a thick skin, and know that as ridiculous as the advice might be that you're getting, there might be something in there you can use.
I think it is one of the hardest things for new teams and new writers and producers to come to grips with, is those notes. Kathryn, what advice would you have for people who are relatively new at processing feedback from other partners?
This is going to sound a bit surprising, but you should respect the generosity of the feedback. It's a hard thing to do and to give, and when people have taken the time to read your script or watch a film, if they're coming up with things that don't resonate with you, it's maybe because there's something else that isn't working. That, as Tusi says, all feedback is good feedback, because it's about how you use it, and it's easy to just reject it. But nearly always there'll be something. The more it rankles, the more likely they've got something that's useful. Sometimes people say things that you just go, you just weren't reading carefully. It must have been late at night. I don't think that's justified. Other times you go, well, that's a fundamental thing that for this kind of film is going to have to be there. Like, you can't make this into a different kind of film. But mostly feedback is there to be used, and one little sentence that you don't even think about when you first see it might be the most useful thing that takes you to the next level. So I guess I would always share feedback with the writer and director. I would always want to see it first so that we can set up a meeting to discuss it. So you don't just throw things at somebody as a blank thing. Thinking about how to deal with it. And also, I don't really, I don't know, this is the complete opposite of a test screening process, but I don't really believe that there's a sort of quantitative thing, like, well, 3 people said this, so that's valid feedback. Only 1 person said that, so that's not valid feedback. 6 people said this. 6 people liked it and only 1 person had a problem with it, so it's okay. And you go, that's not how it works. If what that 1 person who had a problem raises something that kind of gets under your skin, that's something to work with. So, it's not a quantitative business, it's qualitative. And, good artists are magpies. Any useful little gem they will steal and put in their nest and say it was theirs all along. So feedback is to share, it's a tool, and actually it's, in many parts of the process you pay people to give it to you. With funders, public funders, and distributors and sales agents, you're getting it for free. So, they're bringing their perspective, it's valid, and you have to work with that.
That question about paying people, Kathryn, was is interesting. Do you guys work with script consultants, editors, story people, the paid or even the unpaid consultants? And when would you do that? And for what reasons would you be working with some sort of an outside consultant? Anybody go at that?
I think it's when you need somebody fresh to it. You know, when you've been working on development with somebody for a long time, you've bought into what you've been doing. So it's always useful to have a fresh eye. Somebody who hasn't seen something before, doesn't know what was there before, so isn't put off by what used to be there. Whereas, in fact, what used to be there is always there for the team. You know, it's the opposite version of everything you write somehow ends up in the script, even if you take it out of the paper. It's still there. It's the kind of layers and accretions of meaning. But when somebody comes in and goes, I don't understand this, that's really useful. I mean, the most useful feedback is always things that people don't understand, really, and the things that people love and are connecting with. People's answers are usually not very useful. So, you know, people who do an assessment that tells you what the answer is, usually it's probably not the answer. But it might be the key to a good question of what is it that's wrong, that they think this is the answer. So, you know, use them when you've hit a wall, really. That's what I would say, is when you don't know where to go next yourself, find somebody else who will help you take a few steps back and jump higher.
Nick and Michelle, do you use script consultants, story editors, other sort of experts on the projects?
Absolutely. In fact, Kathryn Burnett down there is one of the people we've used in the past a lot, and other writers. And look, even I could see that one of the questions came up there about how without being funded. Any one of us here, should you have a network of friends who are in the industry and some who are not in the industry, and there are people you will turn to and ask about stuff. You know, you'll ask about story, you'll ask about this, or you'll hit a problem and I will pick up the phone and I will phone someone, you know, or Michelle and I will go, right, a big part of the script has an English character in it. Let's go and talk to an English writer who we've worked with before and we like. And usually it will be a matter of, hey, look, there's no money just yet, but we'll find some consultancy money for you if the project goes ahead. And I have to say, personally, from my point of view, I've never ever started work on a project with money up front. Every single thing that I've done that has then gone on and become a project has started life as a spec script, you know. And you know, sometimes
Michelle, any thoughts on working with consultants, or Kathryn, yourself being one?
Yes, no, I was going to say, Kathryn we have used in the past, and I like Kathryn Fitzgerald. It's generally quite far down the process. It might be when you've hit a wall, or you just need some outside input, or a female voice, or an English writer. And it's sometimes we've had money to pay if we've had development money. Other times it's fellow colleagues or other writers, you know, and also I like to be with someone that I trust their feedback. I'm not saying they have to like it. I just trust what they tell us that they feel won't work or does work. And again, fresh eyes are really important. It's a bit like the edit. I mean, you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. And fresh eyes or reading is really valuable. Yeah. So, and again, sometimes in the past on very low budgets, you know, I've given people a case of beer, or, I mean, sometimes it's not necessarily money.
So I think we're getting to a point where we might want to ask some questions. We'll ask some questions from the audience, the attendees. Kathryn, do you want to pick one of these questions?
There's loads of great questions coming in, so I'm just going to start at the bottom. So this is a question that, let me just read it. Right. So as a writer, how do you know when to lose certain scenes that you know may be costly? When you're at the early stage of writing development, are you thinking about creativity versus cost? At what points, this is for Tusi and Nick, at what point do you stop thinking about, I just want to be creative, and you start thinking about the cost? I get that, asked this a lot myself. So Tusi, let's start with you, shall we?
I don't really think that's not my problem. That's Kathrin's problem.
Great, I love it. Nick, what about you?
Work.
Nick, what about you?
Well, I think one thing people tend to forget, a script is a selling document. I know it's a beautiful piece of prose that we craft. We work very hard on all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's something that's going to sell your project. So don't hold back. Throw everything at it. Throw everything at that thing so that when it lands on someone's desk, they go, wow, okay, this is doing all the business. And then people will worry. People like Kathryn and Michelle, as Tusi said, will worry about that later. But to be honest, sometimes you do write to it. If you know you've got access to a certain amount of money, then write to that budget. But first off, just write something on the page that's going to excite people and make them jump on board.
Yeah, I like to think of
budget.
I mean, at the early stages, there's early stages and early stages, right? There's the stages when you're just writing, and I always think of that as like an art stage for the writer, because just you do what you want. So why hamper yourself at that point? When you take it to market, which means you're looking for collaborators like Kathryn and Michelle, or possibly directors and also actors, that conversation will start then. I think I would just add to all of that. If you're a brand new writer and you expect that a multi-exotic location and cast of thousands is going to be easy to sell in New Zealand, it probably won't be. But as Nick said, it's a selling document. And so what it might do is get someone to look at your script and go, I don't know how I'd raise the money for that, but I really like the cut of your jib, and I'd like to talk with you or work with you on something else. So there's that to balance. All right, I've got another question, which I will jump in on, again for writers. This is from Linda. Once a shoot begins, have you ever felt sidelined or alienated from the production or in post? What rights does a writer have on the ultimate creative outcome? And thanks, Kathryn. I'll get back to you in a sec. So that's also for Nick and Tusi. Go, Nick.
Me, right. So look. I've had this happen to me in the past, and I'll be really honest about it. It's not a fun experience. But then on the flip side of it, I'm not particularly interested. On set, there's not a lot of room for a writer. You're just in the way sometimes. But I have, been completely sidelined on projects and pushed out to the side, and then had to, didn't get to see the project till the premiere, and sat there with my mouth hanging open going, what fresh hell is this? And seeing my name on the end of it and go, right, well, oops. And that was a lesson that I had to learn. But in working with Michelle, it's such a collaborative process that I think she would never not let me be included in the final project. And Michelle and I have projects that we're working on abroad that are changing, yet we are part of that process. But yeah, I have felt sidelined and alienated. And if you're a writer, then get used to it.
Okay, that is a terrible thing to say, but thank you for sharing. Tusi, I'm guessing because you're also a director, this is a little bit different for you, but please talk to that question from Linda.
Yeah, I on set, I'm very lucky that you wear both hats. You're a director, and I'm very reliant on my writer's side, especially when scenes are not working and you have to compromise. That's when the writer comes in and says, what is the heart of the story? And then that's where you sort of. But I'm just lucky that I tend to wear both hats, and where the other one is not strong enough. I'm not a strong director, so I tend to rely on what did I see in this as a writer, and how can I translate it into how can my director vision translate into an image? So that sort of thing. But yeah, I've never come across, I've never written stuff that someone else directed, so I can't really talk about that area.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Nick, before we come back to you, I just want to quickly jump to Kathryn, who wanted to say something earlier. So jump on in, Kathryn. I just don't want you to get lost in all the Q&A.
Oh, it's sort of relevant. It's that as a writer and as a director, it's really important that a producer knows what you want in an ideal world. It's silly for the writer or the director to assume, or anybody to assume something will be too expensive, because quite often you're wrong. And I would say your job as a producer is not to say no, which is what lots of people say the job of the producer is. It's the job to say how. And so, you know, something might be costly, but it's absolutely worth it. Other things that actually are really costly that writers don't even contemplate will be costly, like, you know, 3 shots of a car driving by can take, you know, a day's shooting and actually is not needed for the storytelling. So, you know, don't assume you know what's expensive, and don't assume you can't have it, because actually that's the job of the producer, to work with everyone and say, you know, well, we can't do it that way, but is there another way we can do it?
So Kathryn,
I would say aim high. There are film scripts I've read that would just be impossible to finance in New Zealand, or I don't know how to finance them. That's more the truth. They might be picked up in Hollywood and there you're away.
So at which point, Kathryn, just to clarify, do you think when a writer is working on something, they should think about cost? Is it after they've engaged with a producer and already in development with them?
I don't think they should think about cost. I mean, I don't want something to be limited by somebody doing someone else's job. Like, it may be that producers shouldn't do a writer's job, writers shouldn't do a producer's job.
Cool, thank you. So, Karin, do you want to jump in on some of the Q&A? Or do you want me to just carry on?
Yeah, sure. Nick, did you have something you wanted to say before we jump to the next question?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing about which was of what Tusi had said about, you know, there's a thing that happens, which is it's great that he's there because he's still got the storyteller's hat on. He's written it. He knows the story. He knows it inside out. So he's got that there. And very often, I think I've seen things happen where on set, and it's not been a project I've been doing, where they've hit a problem and gone, oh no, we don't have a rubber ducky for this scene. And then some writer goes, oh, don't worry, I've got a rubber gorilla here. Let's just use that instead. And that might be a really important story point. And everyone goes, great, problem solved. You know, we can roll on with the day. And that rubber duck might have been a really important story point that features later on, and it will thrown everything out of whack. And then when you get to the edit, everything's confused and wrong. And I would say, you know, even if a writer's not there on set in terms of being a director or there physically, you should always interrogate the script and say, can we change this? Let's just make sure we can change this without unpicking the whole story that's laid out in front. And maybe that's reason why I should be more present on the sets of films that I work on.
So there's a question here about development hell, as I like to call it. How do you manage those early periods on a project in development when you're asking a lot of time of each other, but there's no guarantee of it reaching the screen or being funded? How far does that generosity stretch? When do you stop encouraging each other to invest time in a project and move on? And yeah, as a sort of an adjunct to that, how much work can a producer reasonably ask a writer to do before you get the funding when you're still at concept? So how do you manage that? Because that unpaid development can be a giant abyss that you fall into and wander around in for a long time. So thoughts on the extent and scope of development and when you just have to, you know, call it quits or get some money. Michelle, some thoughts on that?
That's a really hard one, because you have to be so tenacious and not give up. I know Nick and I went to some sort of script weekend thing, and the person giving it said, projects die because people give up. And in a way, that's totally true. But as you say, how long do you go on and on and on and on? I mean, the other thing is you always have several projects in development, so it's not like you're constantly waiting. But that's a very hard one about how much do you ask the writer. I mean, Nick and I have a pretty good relationship, and he's often very happy to keep working. But it is hard, and it can be very soul destroying. So I don't really know what the answer is. Is that?
I think, Michelle, it's also important to note that you and I have a company together. So, and I'm making a financial investment in working on these scripts, because although, keeping working on them, everything tends to pay off if you believe in it enough, and also we have a war chest full of stuff that's ready to go. And that's not, and I personally make a financial investment in those projects by working on them without money, because I'm confident, and it has been proved in the past, the money will come.
I mean, think about a project like Cousins, which was literally 20 years in development and passed through several teams before it came to the screen. I mean, that goes to your point, Michelle. If you give up, it will die. People didn't give up on that project, and certainly people spent a lot of time, probably unfunded, working on it. Kathryn, what's your thought about development? At what point do you just call it quits, or do you keep something going if you don't have the funding? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on where you're at in the process. Like I think the early stage of development, the less beholden you are to somebody who's paid you to do it, the more freedom you have, and the more you have the chance to shape the project and find out what it is. I don't think people should work for nothing, but that means you need to establish what the basis on which you're working is. So a basic contract that looks at deferrals and the agreement on what will happen if you do get some money. But a film won't get made unless you make it as good as it can be. So, it's a case of talking it through honestly and dreaming about being a great filmmaker if you've got an idea that nobody seems very interested in is definitely counterproductive. Like sometimes you need to take on board that you can't raise the money at the moment. Now, there are some projects that I've given up on at various times, which I still think would be wonderful projects, but the time wasn't right. I look now and I think, well, whether it's the personalities of people who are assessing it, or their life experience, or what they know about the way the market is trending, all of those things come to bear, and it's not really anything to do with you. The projects, I think it's too easy to say a good project will get made. I think you'd like to think that was true, but in a way it suggests that the projects that don't get made aren't good. There are lots of really great projects that don't get made. And I look at some of the ones I've tried to develop that I'm heartbroken that we couldn't get any traction. One was something of a scale that the 2008 crash really scuppered. There are some that I've got at the moment that really can only be co-productions, and they're great projects, but how do we contemplate a co-production at the moment? How do you structure that? There's all sorts of questions that are nothing to do with the project or us. They're to do with time and place. So, even when I take on a project, I try and ask, why why me, why this, why now? And you have to be able to answer all of those questions satisfactorily, and you have to keep asking them. And sometimes now is not the right time. That, you know, I always remember somebody saying, you know, as soon as you can get somebody else to put money into your project, then that's an incentive to keep going. If nobody is interested in putting money into your project, you really do have to think about whether you're on the right thing. But you might think, no, it's just not the right time yet. So there's no simple answer to that.
Nick, you're looking eager there. Did you have something else to say? You are muted.
My phone rang. And I was trying to make it go away.
So I'm conscious that we are nearly out of time, a couple of minutes left. So we did have a question there, and Kathryn, you had mentioned contracts, but we are conscious, we talked about this earlier in a sort of a prep meeting, we're conscious that that's a massive subject. I know that new writers and producers have a lot of questions around that, the contractual relationship, the legal relationship, and often it can be very confusing and fear-inducing. But on behalf of SPADA and the Writers Guild, I know that these are questions that we would like to address probably in a later session, and that you guys are doing the Know Your Rights workshops at the moment. So aware that people are worrying out there about the contracts. Well, the producers are, the writers probably don't care so much about their contracts, do you? But I would like to wrap up on behalf of SPADA and the Writers Guild, and thank you very much indeed for your participation. I'm also aware that we've really only just scratched the surface. It's such a big topic, this question of writer-producer relationships. We haven't been able to answer all the questions, but hopefully everybody heard something that resonated for them today. And to everybody who's out there listening, I hope you have great success in finding the kind of relationships that man there has, that his producer has to put up with. You are a cat. Kathryn, did you want to say anything from the Writers Guild perspective?
No, just that thank you very much for tuning in. And as you quite rightly say, this is very much just scratching the surface. And I think when it comes to contractual advice, the Writers Guild is your port of call, really important. So yes, Karin, we care very deeply about our contracts. So thanks for that, though. Of course we do. It's, as Kathryn Fitzgerald mentioned, it's a business arrangement. And so the sooner writers get their heads around the fact that they're engaging in a business with someone, the better. And the sooner that brand new producers understand that they are engaging in a business relationship with a writer rather than getting an indentured slave or an employee, which they are not, then great. I think I would love to see our industry move towards just a more professional footing. And my experiences with many producers have been amazing. And we work as a team. I'm not employed by them. We're a team, and we're both investing time and money. So yeah, just that, I think contracts are super important. And contracts invariably are, from the guild perspective, we kind of tend to think of those as they're a necessary evil that we all have to have, but they're there in case of worst case scenario. Like, I don't think anyone ever sets out going, I think everything's going to turn to hell. You know, it's just a professional agreement, and that's all it is. And it's the same in a gazillion other industries all around the world of all sorts. It's normal behavior in business, which is what we're doing. So, you know, let's get on it, off to the Writers Guild if you're worried about contracts. Thank you very much, panelists. It's been awesome listening to you. And that's all I have to say. I didn't find Nick funny at all, but I'm glad everyone else enjoyed it. Thanks.
So thank you to everybody, to Michelle, Kathryn, Nick, Tusi, and to Kathryn. I was just being sarcastic about the contract.
I know.
We care about them.
I just took that opportunity to jump in.
And I'm glad you spoke so passionately about it, because I think it is absolutely critical that we do understand that these are professional relationships, and they are business relationships as well as as creative relationships. So thanks to SPADA, thanks to the Writers Guild, and thanks to everybody for being part of this masterclass. Ka kite anō.
Go well, everyone. Thank you.